You guys noticed? Did you guys notice a new feature? Did your family or friends, everyone talk to you about it or not? Or are you just like me and actually no one cares and you're just the only one very excited when something new shows up in your editing workflow? All right, today I want to share what is new, obviously, because I think you guys will be more excited than my aunt about that new Lightroom feature. And I think we will all adopt it and it's gonna be one of those groundbreaking features. So if you're ready, we're gonna be talking about the one feature you won't stop using from now on. Let's get started. All right, I don't know what is happening here in Chicago, but we're literally going through the 4 seasons in 4 days. It's insane. And that is exactly why today I'm gonna stay in and I'm gonna be talking about Lightroom. So if you're ready, grab your laptop. I've got some exciting news for you. If you're using Lightroom and you're using one of the latest version, if you're on the Lightroom CC or like crowd thing, I don't know what they call it, they keep changing names, but if you're on a subscription plan with Adobe and you updated to the latest Lightroom, you might have realized that there is a new function that is called, it's a new slider and it's called texture. Oh yeah. So what does it do? Why is it here? How can we use it? And why do I think it's gonna be groundbreaking and how you're gonna be integrating it in your photos? So I wanna show you that. So I picked up a few different photos, and as you may remember, guys, I was in Guatemala a few days ago. Now I'm back in the studio in Chicago. And I was on the slopes of that amazing volcano. We're looking at the volcano exploding. It was insane, a little bit dangerous. Hopefully I won't die doing that video. At night, it would go absolutely magical and we would get amazing shots. So I thought, why don't we revisit those shots from the volcano and a few from the city with the texture function. So if you're ready, let's get started. I'm gonna grab that photo I already edited of the volcano at night, at sunset. Absolutely insane. At first I was a little bummed, if I'm honest, that there was so many clouds, but after a while, I think it gives like different kind of shots. Like that one, it just looks like it's pulling out of nowhere. Very cool. What is that texture slider, that new texture slider? It's right here. If you go to the right on your panels and you develop model, you see something called texture, right? Now, you might be thinking, is this some kind of sharpening? Is this clarity? Well, no, it's actually completely different. It doesn't do what clarity does. If you remember, clarity was super groundbreaking. A ton of people started using it, a ton of photographers, and I remember some photographers went really far with it and used it maybe a little bit too much. I don't know if you're guilty of that. I really love clarity, but if you push it a little bit too far, things go a little bit grungy. So we're not gonna do that right now, but I will show you the effect of each slider quickly. I highly encourage you to grab a photo and try for yourself on your own laptop, on your own photos, because that's how you can really integrate what is happening here. So texture, if I had to sum it up, and if you don't want to watch anything else after, if you want to increase the feeling of sharpness and a feeling of having something more crisp, I think texture is the slider for you. Now you can stop watching, you can go try it for yourself, or we can try it together. All right, that awesome volcano on fire. What happens if I slide the texture all the way up? So if I increase it to 100, I get a lot more, would say, contrast and sharpness in those details, in those lines over here. You can see it like clearly, look at that, boom. Now, what happens if I just crank up the clarity? The clarity is going to change the light everywhere. It's actually acting on the contrast in the mid-tones mainly, but if we look at it, texture acts more like something we call frequency separation in Photoshop, which basically increases the sharpness and a little bit the details without affecting certain areas, and areas like those, you know, where you don't have as many details, like the skies. But here you have a ton of details, and that's where it's great. It's affecting only that part, only those details. If you go the other way, well, everything gets soft. And that's why apparently, from what I researched, is that that slider was actually created for skin softening at the beginning. So you would put it negatively and you would soften the skin of people. We'll talk about that in a second photo. What I really love already, and if I compare it, for example, to sharpening only, if I were to crank up my sharpening and drop my masking, you can see that sharpening is kind of changing everything and adding a lot of sharpness in those like sky details where it's you don't want it. Actually, you only want it in those areas. So you could add the masking like you might know already, but apparently if I just use texture, it does it better. I get also a little bit more punchiness in the light. So really, really exciting. Now, here is a great way to use it, in my opinion, for example, for night photos in a city or outside. Instead of applying your texture to the whole image, you might want to apply it only to your sky, right? So you might want to take a gradient filter, crank up the texture to 100, and boom, bring it here. Now what's going to happen is, as you can see, you're going to have the Milky Way and the stars that are popping up a lot more. If I were to do the same with clarity, you can see that with clarity, it not only affects my details, it also affects the whole image. It affects a little bit everything. So if I were to crank up my texture right now, that would give me an interesting, I would say, result. And then I could add a range mask. Boom, there we go. And then it would affect only the highlights right now. So if we look at before and after, it's subtle, yet it brings a little bit of that crispiness and those stars. Now, what happens if you're doing street photography? Well, let's take a street photography shot. Back in the days, if you were to crank up that clarity, everything gets super grungy. Okay, so if you're doing a zombie movie, a zombie shoot, clarity all the way up, and then you go paint on people's faces so that they look very scary. That's great, but it's not Halloween right now, it's spring, and what we want is just add a little bit of more detail. So I'm gonna zoom in on that part of the image, the lady with the flowers. We've got a lot of tiny details happening, you see, with all the petals and everything, and we have her hair. So what happens when I crank up the texture? What is happening is that first here, you get a ton more detail in her dress, you get a lot more detail in those flowers. Look at that. You see, it looks a little bit softer when you bring it back to zero. And if I go negative, like it's like super soft. Now, if I bring it up all the way up, that might be a little bit too much because suddenly I feel like it's a little bit over sharpened. But if I wanted to add just a tiny bit of crispiness in those photos, I would use that texture tool like that. Next is simply using it for portraits. I think portraits is gonna be great, especially because when you're increasing, oh wow, look at those details in the hair. Like when you increase the texture, boom, you see, did you see what happened? You get a ton more details in those hair. And it doesn't look grungy because look, if I increase my clarity, the clarity button, well, it gets really grungy. What you would do actually for portrait is use it negatively. So you would literally tone it negatively, hop, so that you can soften the skin. So let's do it super quickly together. Grab your brush tool, and then instead of having your texture to 100, drop it down to maybe, for example, -50, just to try. Then you zoom in on your model's face and you start painting. And what you realize is that it is actually very soft. It's very subtle. It's not like, it doesn't look fake in my opinion, but yet it does a good job at softening that skin. It smudges a little bit the details. That looks pretty good. So if I turn it on and off, and we zoom in on the face, look at that, off, on. Pretty cool, right? It's very subtle. I don't think it's a tool you cannot really overuse, in my opinion. It's not like clarity, where if you were to crank up your clarity to the maximum, it would look, in my opinion, doesn't look great. It's clearly another editing mistake. But if you were to crank up that texture tool all the way up, it's very subtle, so you won't see it too much. So what I would recommend, and how I'm gonna be using that texture tool, is clearly to increase details. Overall, it's not gonna replace clarity for sure. That is not the goal. It is really a tool that is very subtle. I think if you combine it with clarity, you're gonna have very sharp looking results, and it's gonna make a huge difference, especially if you're trying to have non-destructive edits of people's faces when you're doing portraits, or if you're doing night photography, you wanna increase the details in the star, or if you're doing any kind of job where you have a ton of details in an image. like for example a forest, that would be awesome. I think it's a great tool overall. All right, and that's it. That's the new awesome tool that we can add to our toolbox of Lightroom editing. Let me know in the comments if you've tried it. If not, let me know after you tried it, how you feel about it. Do you feel that it's being useful for your workflow or not? For mine, it's gonna be very helpful. If you can hit that notification bell, it will make sure you get notified when I release a new video, and I'm super excited to take you on more adventures. With that being said, I'm gonna go have lunch. I'm gonna enjoy another warm drink because it's really freezing and I'm in a cave right now. And with that being said, guys, I'm wishing you an amazing day. Get out there, go shoot, or stay home and edit. I will see you in the next episode. Have an amazing day. Bye-bye.